a handful of guests who are joining us today and a full agenda. So I am excited to kick it off, but I'll give it one more minute until we have a few more people join with us. All right, everybody. Well, we're 2 minutes past the hour, so I'm going to kick us off. Good afternoon to everybody who is joining us. Happy Thursday. It's nice to be with you all today. Before we kick it off, happy that you all are here to join us talking about election season and Main Street role in election season. I do want to take a minute before we dive into our discussion today to acknowledge we understand that many Main Street communities have been affected by Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. And I understand that really is taking priority for many of you all right now. We at Main Street America are working with our coordinating partners to support communities that have been affected as best we can. And we encourage you, if you're looking for resources on how to respond to this disaster in your community, please check out. We have a new disaster preparedness and resilience resource. But know that we are thinking about you and working on supporting all of our Main Street communities through these hard times. With that, I do want to give a little bit of an overview of what we are here today to do. So I'm in DC. We're about 25 days out from a presidential election. That's certainly what I'm tracking on. But today we're here to talk about elections in general, particularly at the local and state level, elections that you and your Main Street organization may have a role in or interact with. So in this session, we plan to give you some tips and insights on how to navigate elections on behalf of your Main Street organization. But for those of you who are joining us and might not know too much about the Main Street America Network, we lead a collaborative movement with partners and grassroots leaders that advances shared prosperity, creates resilient economies, and improves quality of life through place-based economic development and community preservation in downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts across the country. I know you all are actively working in our Main Street communities across the nation, and we appreciate all you do. We have a vision, our aspiration for the future, so that everyone has access to an inclusive and resilient Main Street, a place that has a thriving local economy, is distinctive and rich in character, and features welcoming spaces and diverse businesses for residents and visitors alike. And here on the government relations team, I am a manager of government relations here at Main Street America, and we certainly think that elections and your local politics have a big role in what you all can do and in seeing this future and this vision through. So Kelly, if you don't mind going to the next screen, as I mentioned, I'm on the government relations team. We work across the Main Street America network, across the nation, with partner organizations and with public officials to advance the mission and vision of our Main Street work. We do this through several avenues. We have an advocacy toolkit. If you're interested in learning more about this, we encourage you to go to our mainstreet.org webpage and go to the government relations page, where you can find more tools and resources to help you advocate in your community, both to your local and state elected officials. We also convene an advocacy community of practice. This is a space for our Main Street leaders across the Main Street America network to come together and share lessons learned about how you all advocate in your communities, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what are the challenges, and what are the opportunities. If you are not involved in this and you're a Main Street leader and you want to be involved in this, feel free to reach out to us. We'll share our email at the end of this, but it's advocacy@mainstreet.org if you'd like to get involved. We have a few other resources that we distribute across the network. For example, federal funding resources, which shows what resources at the federal level, grant programs especially, Main Street communities can tap into. And we're always thinking about the federal policies that we endorse at a national level and like to share that information with you all as we're developing that and knowing what we're honing in on. And finally, I know what many of you all do in your communities across the country. Coalition building is very important to our government relations team. So we join several national coalitions with like-minded organizations in various topics, some in housing, some in community development, some in civic infrastructure, to advance the vision that we want to see for Main Street America. So that's a little bit about the government relations team. And if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, I will pass it over to my colleague, Kelly Humrichouser, to talk a little bit more about what we're doing here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly. I'm also on the government relations team with Michael, and I'm pleased that everybody could join us here to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk about elections, but first we're going to take it back and talk a little bit about why are we working with elected officials in the first place. If you're a Main Street leader, it's probably part of your regular agenda to make sure that you're working with your local elected officials to advance Main Street. And that's kind of the part of the criteria of the Main Street program, that public support element. But there's so much that we can do. And some of that is to just make sure that there's awareness of our program, that we're solving problems at the local level, that we're continuing to gain ground and support for our program. Even if we have a win, we have to keep supporting and keep making the ask for our important needs. We have to make sure that we don't let incentives and things that we need fall away because we've taken them for granted. We have to keep building our partnerships with other organizational leaders in our community to make sure we enhance the voice in our relationship on these issues. So one of the things that some Main Streeters do, you can see on the left, there's a legislative request from the New Mexico Main Street Coalition. They work together across the state to annually make requests of the state in support of the budget for the statewide Main Street program. There's a lot of programs out there doing that work. Michael talked a little bit about it with our advocacy community of practice. But I want to point out a real interesting fact to you all. On an annual basis, we survey Main Street programs. 80% of you say that you need more budget for your Main Street program. About 30 to 50% of that budget normally comes from local government. But only about 20% of you say that advocacy is a priority for your organization. So we're asking you to make sure to think about that conundrum, because if we want to advance the work of our programs, grow our organizational budget, and prioritize the things that are going to be meaningful to us, including projects in our communities, we have to make advocacy a priority. And advocacy is many things, many that you may be doing already. It can be education, just talking to elected officials and other decision makers about your program. It's research, it's the stats that you use to communicate your impact. It's coalition building, as we do on the national level, you likely are doing locally, even if you don't call it a coalition. It's writing op-eds in the paper and getting resources and information out. It can be organizing. We'll talk a little bit about that nonpartisan organizing that we can do. And then there's lobbying, which is making a direct request to an elected official. In these times of election campaign advocacy, we're really talking about all of these things and how you're interacting with these and how they impact your organization during this very particular season. So why is it tricky? Why is this a particularly interesting time to be a Main Street program? There are conflicts that can arise when people in your orbit are going after a political office. The political conversation can get a little bit tricky. You might be approached by people who are running for office as like, hey, can you support me? Your funding for your program, it might feel and seem like it's extremely dependent on what's happening in the local election around you. And you may be running for office. You have friends who are running for office. You may just want to support candidates who align with your own personal goals and beliefs, but you're a local leader and everybody knows that you're the Main Street leader. You have to hide out in a booth when you go to dinner so people don't come and ask you for support. on a local business issue. So how could you possibly express your political beliefs without getting tied to the organization? The key thing here is to maintain nonpartisanship, and we'll talk more about that. But what we don't want to do is what you see. I made a really silly graphic. Main Street's not going to endorse Michael to run for city council. Main Street America is not going to endorse a candidate as a nonprofit organization. Many of you are nonprofit organizations, and really, that's the golden rule. There are some particular do's and don'ts when you think about trying to maintain nonpartisanship for a Main Street organization. And these are generally do's and don'ts as part of being a 501c3, which the majority of the Main Street network is. Some of you are housed in city government. Some of you have that kind of combination of being both city government and nonprofit. These are probably a good golden rule in either regard. So make sure that if you're thinking about candidates locally, you're focusing on the issues, not individuals. You want to make sure that you're also appointing a spokesperson for your organization. It's very possible that you want to have a board member, or maybe it's your executive director, be the person that might field any inquiries that have to do with elections or political dynamics locally, so that you're speaking with one voice and you're not having a mixed and confused message. When you are doing anything that might relate to an election, say there's an elected official during campaign season coming for an event, maybe issue a disclaimer. Say the representative is visiting the Main Street program as part of his elected role. Main Street X, wherever you are, does not endorse political candidates and is a nonpartisan organization. There are ways to make sure that you are navigating around the concept of being seen as endorsing a political candidate by making sure that you offer that kind of context for their visit, or however you're interacting with them. In general, if you are having an interaction with somebody who is a candidate for office, you want to make sure that you are offering the same opportunity to all candidates, whether that be participation in an event, promotion of something that that an elected official has worked on with you, or if you're thinking about even the space in your community that you might have where an elected official might want to be present if you have control over that space. Opportunities need to be given equally to everyone. If you are campaigning for an elected official, for yourself, you should. We want you to be active political participants, but we want you to do so with your own time and resources. So keep in mind that it's probably not a great idea to be using any Main Street budget or resources for any campaign resources or anyone. And that if you're going door to door, if I were to go door to door in support of a candidate for my state senate, I probably wouldn't want to wear a Main Street America t-shirt, right? Or Main Street Dixon or Shaw or otherwise. You want to make sure that you are trying to not associate yourself and not use your organizational status as part of that campaign activity. The not side is just a little bit of the opposite of the do side, right? So remember, it is not advisable to endorse a candidate or a political party or to speak about a candidate, frankly, good or bad, but particularly in a disparaging way. Speak about the issues if you feel that you need to. And do not use organization resources to support a candidate. As much as your voice counts, it's also the tools that you have at your discretion. Now, these tips on maintaining nonpartisanship are taken from and give full credit to Boulder Advocacy, which is part of the Alliance for Justice, a nonprofit organization. We're going to link to those broader resources because there is a litany of materials here that can be helpful to you. I am not a lawyer. Michael's not a lawyer. We want to make sure that if you do have a specific concern, a lot of this has to do with IRS accountability, right? You do want to make sure that you're fitting into that box. I saw a note in the chat about 501c6s. The general difference between a 501c3 and a 501c6 is the ability to lobby, but you'd still want to keep in mind, no matter your tax status, the opportunity to maintain nonpartisanship, because it just gets tricky with organizations at this time, and maintaining leadership of your organization while things are shifting. I'll give you an example of that. I get these questions pretty frequently, so this is one I want to share with you. Here's what happens. Your current mayor, city council person, however, is a huge fan of Main Street, and he's supported you. But now in the election, he's being challenged. He has a viable challenger, and he could lose his seat. He's wanting you, and maybe just kind of like, hey, Main Street's got me, right? How do you handle this? Maintain that nonpartisanship, issue that disclaimer, make sure that if you're offering any participation with him, that you're also in a candidate role, that you're offering that to the other candidate. And from a perspective of leadership, which we can also get into in discussion, I would also say you want to be a little bit careful about how much you over participate with one elected official at any time, to make sure that you're balancing your role and maintaining the fact that you have an organization that you need to lead no matter who the political leadership is. A candidate reached out to us about using our event space. Should we? Many Main Streets have spaces in their communities, that whether they're in ownership of them or in control of them. The key rule of thumb here is to make sure that if you offered that space to one candidate, if they reached out to you, that all the campaigns know that that space is available to them for a campaign event. It's better to make sure proactively that you're allowing all of the campaigns to use something than to do that and then face scrutiny for that. Finally, you're the executive director. Your best friend is running for city council. Can you help with the campaign? As we said, yes, you can help with the campaign, but there is a little bit of savviness here, right? To make sure that when you introduce yourself, you say, hi, I'm Kelly. I'm just one of your neighbors out here doing outreach about a candidate. If that person knows you as a Main Streeter and asks you anything about that, I would say, this is my personal time and resources. I'm out here supporting a friend on my own behalf. If you do write a letter of support and sign your name to it for a candidate, the only way that you can use your organization is to say your organization's name and say for identification purposes only. That is the caveat that would need to be included there. Okay. So the opposite side of this is, what could you do proactively? Can you be a participant in making your community a better place by having active participation in the civic process? And the answer is absolutely. I would say the first way that you could do that on a regular basis is voter registration. Not that you personally have to do this, but if you did in partnership invite an organization like the League of Women Voters, or many times this is happening specifically in Main Street communities with college campuses, where if you're having an event downtown, there's also a voter registration drive as part of that event. That's an evergreen concept that you can always encourage people to participate in the civic process. Ballot measures. If you have a ballot measure in your community, this is not a political idea, but a concept about how we can create a ballot measure to a levy for X, right? Parks are really important to us, a levy for X. Technically, you can support that. There are caveats. There are resources, and the resources that I previously mentioned about how you want to do that and maintain nonpartisanship. But a nonprofit organization can support a ballot measure. Candidate questionnaires. You can produce, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a few moments. Candidate questionnaires are typically written documents where the organization is producing a list of questions that it wants answered by the candidates about issues that it cares about. You can create candidate questionnaires and distribute them to local elected officials to get their feedback on issues that matter to downtown. You would ask open-ended questions, such as, how would you support downtown businesses? Or how do you feel that you would increase economic development opportunities in our community? You don't want to ask the candidate leading questions. If you pursue a candidate questionnaire, you want to make sure to distribute the same questions to all candidates. Again, open-ended questions. Do not edit responses, and produce printed materials that you distribute to the community. That's the value of a candidate questionnaire, but you are allowed to ask about issues that are important to you. Finally, candidate forums. We're going to talk more directly about candidate forums in just a second here. I feel like some main streets, but not that many, are already hosting candidate forums. So we want to uplift this. You can host candidate forums, but the bottom line for all of these is that you want to maintain nonpartisanship. Again, the Alliance for Justice has great resources, and we're going to have a conversation now about what it is to host an election candidate forum. So I'd like to invite Amanda to join me on the screen. Amanda Weike is the Executive Director of Discover Dixon in Dixon, Illinois. And Amanda, I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Kelly.
I did the wrong thing there. I wanted to click out of the slides for a second, but instead I just went to the, I apologize. We're going to go right back there. All right. Amanda, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and about Discover Dixon?
Sure. Yeah. Discover Dixon, Dixon Chamber of Commerce in Main Street. We are a merged community development organization. As of that process started in 2017. So it's still fairly new. I was a board member, which is what got me into this role, and I'm now the executive director here. So that's just a little bit about us, but we represent Dixon, Illinois, and you can see our beautiful Main Street right behind me.
Yeah, and I also included a link to the Discover Dixon Candidate Forum on the screen here if anybody wants to jump in, and you can see a little bit of what Amanda's doing, but we want to kind of, that's the public facing version, what the community sees. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what it is that a candidate forum is and how you participate in those. So can you just tell me a little bit about the background about Discover Dixon and how it came to host candidate forums?
Sure. It's really grown over the years. So candidate forums used to be hosted by our local media company, our local newspaper. 20 years ago, that was a booming industry in our community, and they were printing the newspapers. You had all of your reporters, photographers, designers, everybody was here. So they hosted the candidate forums for every election. But over the years, our local media has changed, and that workforce has really shrunk. And they stopped doing it. So nobody was. And our organization came to do these for local elections. So for our school board elections, our city council, and all of those local election processes. Well, this past spring, we had two of the candidates in our state representative district that were both from Dixon. 2 out of the 3 candidates in the Republican primary were from our community. And so we thought, well, this is just another opportunity. There needs to be a forum to inform the voters, and why not us? So we started to integrate the state elections as well into our candidate forum. And so the spring was the first one. That was an important election because there was no Democrat candidate. So the primary was the election, which is why we felt it was really important to bring more awareness, because this was the election, and you have your voters that are not voting if it's a primary. They're only voting in the November elections. So it was really important to bring awareness to the community and also be the trusted voice that is nonpartisan to be able to showcase the candidates that were available.
That's excellent, and really interesting thought process to make sure you're participating in those early elections in the whole cycle, to make sure that you're preparing people. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the format of the candidate forum? How do you organize that?
Yeah, so the format, we ask for submissions from the community ahead of time for the questions. So this is another great way to engage our local business community, our Main Street community, our just constituents, and let them be a part of the process. And so we take submissions, we promote it online, we promote it in all of our local media, and build the list of questions for the candidates based on public input. So it is also a really great way to remain nonpartisan, but share with those politicians what the issues that their constituents are caring about. So we build those questions, and then we keep everything equal. So we start with there's an introduction, and that's timed. So each candidate gets the same amount of time to introduce themselves. I think that's usually about 3 minutes. And then we have questions, and I believe they have 1 minute for each question, each candidate does. We have it moderated by another local leader, generally somebody else who is nonpartisan. So our local community college president is typically our moderator for our events. But it's another way to just, grab those partnerships and do this together with local community leaders. So everybody gets a minute for the questions. There is no debate. We don't do a debate format. We keep it pretty simple. And then again, everybody has a standard amount of time to close. And I think that's usually about 2 minutes. And that's the end.
So for the size of Dixon, about how many attendees would you normally get, just so people can plan the space?
Yeah, we don't get a lot of in-person attendees. When we do this, sometimes you're going to get 50 people. We're about 16,000 people in our community, and we get, maybe 50 people, maybe a little bit more for a local election, 100 to 200. I think it's going to vary by community. We stream ours online as well and keep it available. If you see this link, you're going to be able to go and check out the YouTube and see the event. But we do get more streams online than we do in-person viewership.
That's important, just to make sure we have the logistics down. But what would you say is the benefit, right, for Discover Dixon to be in this position, in this role?
Well, I think that there's a lot of different ways that we benefit as an organization. Number one, just because civic engagement is important, right? And so we believe wholeheartedly in that anyway. But also, it gives our local businesses and our local main streets the voice that they need with these candidates. So, and builds our relationship by providing that opportunity for them. So we are a trusted source. We are nonpartisan. Somebody who doesn't necessarily want to engage in one party or another can engage with us because we are trusted and we are nonpartisan. So it just kind of lets you be the bridge between politics and your community.
That's a wonderful way to put it. Thank you. And if you are, messaging to any Main Street leaders who are listening to this, what would you say your piece of advice to them is in terms of approaching a candidate forum?
I think anybody can do this, and we've done it a couple of different ways, Kelly. So we also have our Chamber of Commerce hat, which maybe a Chamber of Commerce in your community is more typically hosting these candidate forums. But I do think that this is a great opportunity for collaboration, whether it is with a Chamber of Commerce, or maybe it is with your education partners or your media partners. I think this is just a really great way to have a community partnership. And it does not take a lot of planning. We put together those questions, we stream it online. We've done it with an iPhone. You can do it, very simply, or you can go as elaborate as you want, but it does not have to be, a big thing. And it still provides a great service to your community and lets you be a trusted source for your community. But I think that, one person could pull this off very easily. I think, it is just a quick promotion on our flyers, and it's that one-day event. We sometimes provide the questions in advance to the candidates. Sometimes we don't. We prefer not to. We've had to sometimes to get to the candidates to show up. But, we want as much representation there as possible. So.
Excellent. Well, Amanda, we congratulate you on pulling off great events like this. We're super enthusiastic about Discover Dixon's ability to do this on a regular basis and support the community in this way. And I really do think it goes back to that, while local media has really died, where is that trusted news and information source to kind of cut through the partisanship in communities? It can be a Main Street program, right? So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent. We're going to shift gears slightly now, and I'm going to turn it back over to Michael. And he's going to introduce our next discussion section.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you for sharing that, Amanda. I loved hearing about how you support civic engagement through these candidate forums. And I feel like it's such a good platform for local businesses to build those relationships with elected officials. I know I would love to come to Dixon to see some of these. So I should say, we don't host candidate forums here at Main Street America, but we do record our sessions for streaming later. So we are recording this session and we will post it for you all to see. We know that people are busy and we want you all to be able to tune in when you want to tune in. Um, so I have the pleasure of welcoming some great Main Street leaders who are also elected officials to do a little bit of a discussion about how you manage both of those roles. So perhaps I can hand it over to each of the three of you to introduce yourself and then talk about your role both in Main Street and as an elected leader. So I see Alex is off mute. I will hand it over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Alex Pandro. I am the executive director of Show on Main Streets here in Washington, D.C. We're one of the 28 main streets in Washington, D.C. I have been the founding board chair, and the second executive director of the organization. I've been the executive director since 2004. And I have also been an elected official in Washington, D.C. for most of that time. Matter of fact, one of my first campaign promises was to find ways to bring businesses back to our commercial corridors. And we started a Main Street program in my first term. So it was natural for us to pursue that. And there have been challenges in having both hats to wear at the same time. Primarily conflicts of interest. When you have a political position and a position of influence, like a Main Street director, it's natural for people to have suspicions about motivations and whether or not your positions on certain issues are truly in the community's best interest and perhaps more of the Main Street's best interest. So navigating those conflicts of interest, can be complex. We here in Washington, D.C. have a board of election and ethics, which guides our conduct. So a lot of those issues can be navigated that way. But one of the most important things for elected officials that are also Main Street directors to do to make sure that you maintain the integrity of both roles is to recuse from voting on issues that directly affect the organization financially. So if our Main Street is asking for funding for a particular activity or is going to be voting on a zoning matter that potentially that the developer that's involved is going to be providing funding to the Main Street, then that's a hands-off situation. I actually, leave the room completely and don't even participate in the discussions. So that's, one of the ways that can be very helpful to try to have a firewall between those. So I think that's probably enough of an explanation about some of the things that I do to try to maintain that integrity.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Alex, and I'll give our other guests a chance to introduce themselves. But before we do that, who do we have the honor of, or who is joining you in your background, this big statue?
So that is Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history. I was instrumental in finding the funding to create this monument to father of Black history, who actually lived and worked in our service area. So and we are about to open a National Park Service site dedicated to Dr. Woodson later this year.
Awesome. That's great. I'm glad he's joining us as well today. So maybe I will pass the mic over to Trey to introduce yourself and talk about your role as a Main Street leader and as an elected official.
Thank you so much for hosting and for providing space to have these critical conversations. So I'm Trey Sherwood. I am the executive director of Laramie Main Street. We are a 501c3 formed in 2005. We are a 2022 GAMSA winner. So it has been a wild ride. I have been with the organization 13 and a half years. In 2009, I was able to attend Leadership Wyoming, which is a year-long program where you learn about communities and challenges facing the state. So I was already all in on Laramie and then fell in love with Wyoming. And at that point decided I wanted to run for office. It wasn't feasible though, because I was the only employee with the organization for many years, for the first 8 years. But now I do have some amazing staff, part-time staff. And then ironically, during COVID, the person who was representing my district in the Wyoming House of Representatives decided to run for a Senate position. And so I went ahead and ran for office and won my first go at it. So I'm just finishing my second term with the Wyoming House of Representatives. I'm in the middle of running for my third term right now. So I essentially have 3 jobs: Main Street Director, candidate, and sitting legislator. So happy to answer questions as we go.
Oops, I was having trouble with my mic there. I can't imagine how busy you must be right now, but congratulations on that, and kudos to you for such a long tenure with the Main Street program. So Matt, I will pass it over to you now to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Matt Wietrich, and I am the executive director with Jefferson Matters in Jefferson, Iowa, at a little town of about 4,200 in west central Iowa. We've been a Main Street community for 12 years. I've been the director for 2, and I am also a city councilman. I've been on city council for about 6 years. And I would echo a lot of what Alex and Trey said, and certainly abstaining from certain votes and decision-making and things like that is one of the obvious things, and having a good relationship with the city attorney to kind of navigate some of those waters and make sure we're doing all the right things and keeping everything good and clean and on the up and up in the public eye, and making sure perception is reality with all of that. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. Thanks for that, Matt. And I think all 3 of you have already started to speak to what I was thinking about asking you next, which is some challenges you face as you balance both of these roles. Alex, I know you talked about kind of suspicions about motivations and conflict of interest. And it sounds like, Matt, you're echoing a little bit of that, but maybe I could have either you expand on that or other challenges you all have faced. And it would be great too to hear about how you went about resolving those.
Sure, be happy to, but I just wanted to mention that, yes, we were also a GAMSA winner back in 2016. So be sure to give ourselves a little credit for that.
Great, so, congratulations.
And I didn't mention what my position is. So here in Washington, D.C., we're not a state. If we were a state, our mayor would be the governor, the city council would be the state legislature, I would be a town councilman. It's called an advisory neighborhood commissioner. I represent 2,000 people in the last census, and the body that I'm on has about 12,000 people out of the 750,000 people in Washington, D.C. So I also ran at large as a council for the city council. I was not successful. It was in the middle of a pandemic, but I don't regret having done it. But it was very important that people know that one of the major accomplishments that I had been able to achieve as part of being an elected official was to find the resources to help our Main Street grow, our community grow. So there were times when I had to talk about what we accomplished without talking about the organization in order to try to maintain that even keel and not confuse people as to whether or not I was trying to trade on my day job as I was, pursuing elected office or to get reelected, since I've been elected and reelected now 11 times, and I'm a candidate right now again for another term. So I think that it can be difficult to try to get people to think of you in more than one role, because I'm often referred to as the mayor of Shaw. As long as you're not in the middle of a campaign season, people will naturally be asking you questions about your elected office and your positions, interchangeably about what's that new restaurant that's opening on 9th Street, or when is that big Art All Night event coming? So always have to be mindful, of those boundaries, and and wearing, and which hat you're wearing, and be deft at being able to change those hats when necessary.
Thank you. Matt and Trey, please feel free to add any thoughts you all have.
Well, I've got an example or two just of some situations where it's kind of been on a couple of sides of things, and right now, one for us here in the community is we've got a 10-year forgivable loan program for businesses or building owners around our square in our district, and the agreement is you can get a $150,000 10-year forgivable loan as long as you maintain a business in that building for 10 years. And there's a situation where the couple that owns it had some severe health issues and had to close their business. And for a couple of years here, they've been trying to sell the building and haven't had luck. And finally, a buyer was coming along. So the city, the committee that was in charge of that program looked at it and said, well, technically you're in breach of contract, and we want you to reimburse the city for that. It will say year and a half of finances. So, $22,500 per se. Maybe it would be, for example. So, on one hand, as a Main Street director, I'm certainly going to be pro business owner and try to look at how is there middle ground to be had, and be in support of the business owner. But then from the city side, it really puts them in a tough situation, because this is the first time this has come up, and we have a number of other buildings that are having 10-year forgivable loans. So where do we go in the future the next time this might come up? And how do we objectively answer? How do we objectively respond to this, that we can refer back to how we reacted to this? Because you can't say, well, because so-and-so felt this way or something happened. And how do you say the next person wasn't ill enough, or whatever it may be? So it's kind of a black and white as much as you can make it situation. Again, try to find maybe some middle ground if possible. But for the most part, I mean, they understand. We get it. We were in breach of contract. So essentially, when the building eventually sells, they're those dollars will come off of the purchase price. So you want to have that empathetic side, but also the city has to be able to objectively handle this, and especially, what precedent are you setting? So that's been kind of an interesting one to be on both sides of. The other thing was last fall, I was up for re-election, and there is a new housing project coming in, an apartment per se. Well, there's been a couple of them, and they've been kind of controversial because there's been some negative connotations associated with low-income housing, of course, and so people have their perceptions of that. And every council meeting was very busy, very interactive for several months there. And so the issue, unfortunately, became politicized. So there was candidates running who were for this housing and who weren't for this housing. And then therefore, our organization, as a Main Street organization, assumptions were made that the Main Street organization was supporting the housing development. And basically it took one or two of our board members to come and stand up and say, there's nothing that has been said from the organization. If you're just making this assumption because Matt works there, then that's incorrect. Like that, there's been no position taken. So having that your board or your board president people go there to basically go to bat for the organization and have me not speaking to that whatsoever is generally the way we try to handle things. Same thing with quarterly reports. We do quarterly reports, and I say nothing, and we have board president or our team leaders come and do quarterly reports, and I stay completely out of it. So, there's a few situations that we've dealt with here in this last year.
Yeah, thanks for those examples, man. I think it really shows kind of the conflicts that you have to think through when you're wearing multiple hats there.
Ooh, I'm feeling a lot of empathy right now. I guess I'm going to simplify it a little bit or take a step back that when I decided to run for office, I had an executive board meeting, I had a full board meeting. My board members were able to voice their, their concerns, their questions about how we would sort of manage this as an organization, how our interactions, with our community partners or local government officials might change. And so we worked through a lot of that behind the scenes before I even announced. And it was great because we were able to sort of set expectations and go back to our policies and procedures handbook and make sure that we were, abiding by those rules. So in terms of like wearing multiple hats, I literally had name tags made that say like Trey Sherwood, like human being, like it's just me today, or Trey Sherwood, executive director for Main Street, Trey Sherwood, candidate, Trey Sherwood, elected official, So I have like name tags that I can switch on and off and kind of point to when people are talking to me and say like, hey, this is the role I'm playing right now. We can talk offline about that other issue later. And then as is normal, a Main Street office is, always people coming in and out, our volunteers, our board members, our businesses, members of the community. And so anytime somebody walks in and has like a campaign related question, I'm like, nope, out the door. We're either going to schedule a time to talk later, or we will literally go out on the street, down to the local coffee shop, something, and make sure those conversations are very separate and that they happen outside of the office. We also decided we host the largest farmers market in Wyoming, which again, small growing season. So I'm sure it's tiny compared to your communities, but we created a policy that we do not allow any political organizations or candidates to table or actively, do community outreach at our farmers market. And I don't go to the farmers market as the Main Street director. And so we just said, it's a popular spot to gather, but we don't want to play favorites. And so we're just saying no to this as a proactive measure. I don't know. So those are some of the things that we did to hopefully create a balance or avoid conflicts. I should say that the most difficult thing that I've had to navigate is, again, I was with the organization, 8 or 9 years before I even announced. And I had businesses who were like, I had no idea what your political affiliation was until you announced, which made me really happy because my goal was always to treat everybody the same, regardless, of everything, regardless of any circumstance. Like if you wanted to open a business or be in business downtown, like I was your girl, I'm going to support you. But the hardest thing was when I had a business owner who disagreed with my political affiliation, shut off all communication with us. And so she will not speak to me. She will kick our board members out when they go in to check on her. Like that has been the most difficult thing because I still want her to be wildly successful, but because I announced, it just eroded the relationship. And we're still trying to navigate that 4 years later. So that's a hard one.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, and I think that really is a real accomplishment that your political affiliation wasn't clear for all that time until you announced. I also love the name tag idea, and I imagine you must wear your Trey Sherwood human being tag at the farmers market. So I do want to give our attendees opportunity for questions. So feel free to start dropping questions in the chat if you have them. But before we do that, if our guests want to just respond to one final question, just one piece of advice that you would impart on Main Street leaders who are trying to maintain their nonpartisanship. And whoever wants to kick it off, feel free to. And Amanda, we would love to hear you as well.
I can start. I think that, our candidate forum really did play a role in that because we were able to highlight how nonpartisan we were. And we were also able to really hear from our community. Everyone's so tired of polarization. And if we can kind of be that nonpartisan voice, it's really important. We really learned that this year, and just showing respect to both sides of the aisle. The questions that came through in our candidate forum were, tell us about a policy that you agree with from the other side. Tell me something you admire about your opponent. I mean, I think it was really evident that we just need to be humans again in this field and remain nonpartisan.
Thank you for that, Amanda, and such a great reminder.
So I'm fortunate in that my position is actually nonpartisan. There are no primaries, just a general election. So I know the definition of nonpartisan in this instance is a little different, but nonetheless, that is a benefit of my particular position. Honestly, just always making sure that people know what hat you're wearing when you're out there. I wish I had all those badges that Trey was talking about, because unfortunately, in addition to my elected official and my day job, I'm also the chair of the board of a number of other community organizations. And inevitably, there are folks that are wondering which hat I'm wearing. And so maybe hats, maybe I can get hats made up instead of pins, badges. Maybe that's an alternative.
Alex, when I see you when I'm walking around in shawl, take a guess at what hat you're wearing when I see you. And Matt and Trey, do you have any tips that you'd like to share?
I mean, I really like the information Amanda provided and the issue-based approach to those questions. I think that is lovely. And understanding, what it is that keeps our business owners up at night and being able to verbalize that need and concern to the elected officials, I think is a really amazing service. So thank you for that, Amanda. And I guess to say it's not a perfect approach, but one of the things that we value is constant communication, that Main Streets are for everyone, and that our Main Street, is the heart of our community, and we want our community reflected within our downtown space. And so we try to reflect that in our events and in our branding and in our messaging. We try to make sure that we're celebrating businesses, across the age, socioeconomic, startup, selling, retiring, and just make sure that we're constantly lifting up businesses, in all stages of their life, regardless of their political affiliation. Again, it's never been important to me or the organization. And so we just try to keep celebrating that through our messaging. Ironically, Amanda, our city council, we have a fee for service agreement with our city council, as does our chamber. And in that agreement, it says that we are not allowed to host any candidate forums. So yeah, it's been kind of like an awkward thing that we can't host candidate questionnaires or candidate forums. And so we don't, because that's what the agreement says, but we have a really amazing League of Women Voters who partners with our local library. And so they do that work. And if somebody has a question about a candidate, we point to them as a resource.
I would just add that those are all really, really good comments. Being pro community, pro everyone, we're try to be the unifier in our community in general, and I'm really leaning on that theme, but also that we do a lot of just data-driven things. So it seems like you're being as objective as possible. And I've always felt that way too, as just a city council person, trying to be as pragmatic as possible and as objective as possible, and portraying those messages in both hats, and knowing that's not always easy, but trying to look at facts and utilizing experts, quote unquote, right? And just being as objective and pragmatic as much as possible, and putting that methodology out there as much as possible, clearly communicating those things, so it doesn't seem like there's personal opinions coming in as often as possible.
Very important point, Matt, to add there. So I know I've seen a few questions in the chat here, so I'm just going to open it up to anyone who would like to answer them. Earlier, we got a question that said, "I'm a volunteer election judge. Is this a bad idea?"
I think it's a great idea. I think as long as you follow the guidance that we've previously stated about making sure to not use Main Street resources for that time, and making sure your Main Street hat isn't on, literally while you're doing that job, then that's an important role to play in your community, my personal opinion.
Our events director is an election judge, and I think it's fantastic that she does that. We need those volunteers in our community. If we're pro community, we have to be pro volunteerism.
Great.
Speaking of pro volunteerism, one of the other questions was, what do you suggest for Main Street volunteers who are running for political office? Should they step away from their volunteer duties?
I don't think it's necessary for them to step away. I mean, as long as they're not officers or board members, and as long as they're not bringing their electioneering into any Main Street events, I think that's fine. We actually have had elected officials on our board, and many of our sister Main Streets around Washington have representatives of council members or even council members on their boards. So as long as people can be objective and can answer the questions when someone poses them as to, okay, which hat are you wearing here? It's perfectly acceptable and actually should be encouraged for people to want to step forward and seek political office.
I would add that, in our small community, it's a little easier for people to accept that overlap in positions sometimes, just because there's only so many people to go around. But then just to really kind of sell the idea that the more communication there is, the better. And the more interaction with different entities, the better. And we can all work together pulling the same direction. So celebrating those dual volunteer opportunities and involvement, and as I think really there's a lot of positive there, just trying to focus on that. And but still, understanding there are some times where you have to acknowledge one versus the other and what you're doing too.
Another question that just came in. So should a board member who is a mayoral candidate step away?
So I'm going to say that's a conversation that your board needs to have. But in terms of time commitment, if they're actually going to go and do the work to get in front of their constituents, they may be stretched too thin to do both. But really you go back to your policies and procedures, or whatever your bylaws, say, and if that's not addressed there, that needs to be a conversation, with the board. Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Trey.
No, I was going to add, I think earlier there was a conversation about what if the mayor is running for re-election, there's somebody challenging them. One of the things we've done as advocates, so even before I was an elected official, is we would take each one of my board members would take a member of city council or somebody running for city council to coffee and just talk about what is Main Street, what do we do, what is our mission, our roles, what projects are we working on, and so that every council candidate or potential candidate had an opportunity to learn about what we're doing, ask questions about our fee for service agreement, whatever it may be. And so we are sort of equal opportunity with those public elected officials, presenting ourselves to them as community partner.
I love that. Thanks for chiming in with that. I want to say Donnie asked a question about marijuana dispensaries and the legality of using them as sponsors. Donnie, I'm going to look into that for you and get back to you on it. I'm not sure that we can answer it completely on the program right now. So I want to just pause on that, and we're kind of at the end of our time here, and I want to offer just a couple concluding remarks. And so thank you to everybody who's participated with us today, and we'll continue this discussion on the point. If anybody wants to keep having the dialogue, we are more than happy to. And I just want to say a couple of things. Don't let the election bog you down as well, to the extent that you're not looking past that, to make sure that you're maintaining your program, right? Even if you are getting kerfuffled in everything that's happening politically in your community, keep your advocacy efforts going for your program, and make sure, like Trey was just giving us the example of meeting with candidates before the election, as soon as this election's over too, we're going to have newly elected folks, and it's time to reach out to them. And we're going to do another webinar for you in November to talk about that. So let's make sure that we're keeping that on our mind. And stay aware of budget processes. Right now, states and cities, whether or not there's an election, they are still building their budgets for next year. So independent of the political changes, there's still staff that are working on budgets, and that might affect what you're doing in your community. So just stay involved in those conversations. We want to flag for you a couple of government relations resources. We mentioned the federal funding guide previously, a bunch of different federal funds that you could be looking for. And I also want to flag for you that if you've ever thought to yourself, my community has a project and we need a federal earmark, now is a really good time to start thinking about that. We have a resource on our website, which is a brief guide presented by our Percent for Place Coalition, a national coalition that we work with, about how to go after what is called community project funded or congressionally directed spending, better known as earmarks. Those requests are normally submitted to offices in the spring, around February or March, but it happens really quickly and you have to be prepared in advance. So we just want to flag this as a resource for you now, in case you want to get prepared for that going forward. Finally, we're going to be inviting everyone to Hill Day in 2025. If you want to join us in Washington, D.C., and don't worry, Alex, we're reaching out to you about this too. We'd love to see you and have you join us in February 4th and 5th. Main Street has done a couple of these in smaller ways, but this year we're expanding participation to our full community. So anybody who wants to join us this year will be welcome. And we'll make sure to be sharing that link with everybody as a follow-up in case you want to click there to register or just get more information about what the event is. If you have any questions, even for any of our panelists here, we're happy to ask them on your behalf. Just give us a shout at advocacy@mainstreet.org. Michael, great job facilitating conversation. Amanda, wonderful work out there in Dixon. Alex, Matt, Trey, we can't thank you enough for taking the time, especially while we're in the midst of these processes, for having you join us for the conversation, which I think we're going to look back on and say, man, this is some great information, and we'll have a blog post coming to recap it as well. So we love the fact that you could participate with us, and thank you so much. All right. Thanks, everybody.